just going to say that we are recording our session starting this point only for the purposes that we capture both the presentation and the Q&A, so that we have it as a reference for later on. So we're going to get started. I know some folks are coming in and out, but most of our core board members are here, as well as our other partners and friends and guests. So let me begin by introducing our speaker. So Bob Harris is a certified association executive, and he has over 30 years of experience in this business, and he has an international scope of his connections of work in this country and overseas. He is a friend and colleague of Donna Dodd as well, and has a very highly regarded in the field. And I thought that it would be good to get some insights about effective board work, broadly defined. This is not to say that you all don't have experience with board work or anything like that. It's just so that we're all on the same page, and it's a good way to also have an expert so we can bounce questions and have some discussion. So Bob, welcome to our ACSP board meeting. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your experience and expertise with us. And I'll hand it off to you.
Super. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Laxmi. It's nice to see you, Donna. Nice to see you and everyone else on the call too. Thank you for your time. Volunteer leaders have a passion and a mission, and I'm so honored to meet you. My next stop, as you say, I do global work. My next stop is Azerbaijan. Yesterday was Kansas. The next one is Azerbaijan. So working with organizations to understand structure and strategy. So I'm honored to be here. What I'd like out of this call is a confidence in your role as board members, in the concept of governance, and to look at the structure of the organization, the funds, the things that you don't know what to ask. You get on a board, someone says, well, you get on the board, the nominating committee might have told you you don't have to do anything when you get on the board. I'd like to dispel that for you today and answer your questions. I want to focus on a board refresh or governance refresh at first. We'll take a break and then come back and look at board meetings, confidentiality, conflicts of interest, abstentions, rules of order. So Laxmi, what an honor it is to be with you and to meet the society, and to everyone who's serving on the board. If you look at the screen, everything on my website is free, nonprofitcenter.com. There are 155,000 associations in the USA. Donna, next week I'm visiting in Kentucky with the barrel makers, the people who, the guys, the men and women that make barrels for whiskey and bourbon.
If they can get me a couple, I'll take two.
There's an association for everybody. My next favorite is the Romance Writers Association and the Chocolate Association. And when they have a meeting, they bring the best. So Zoom really destroyed their ability to share the chocolates. So I am certified association executives. I teach for the US Chamber of Commerce, and you can see some of the countries that I visit. And the countries I go to are the State Department sending me there because what you do is the foundation of democracy, where you're actually improving society through design, through safety, through finding jobs for people. So I have great respect for what you do, all 116 members in the board of directors. This was my work in Ukraine, and I bring it up because I'm very sad, of course, about Ukraine. I know everybody is. This is the Chamber of Commerce. And they do have a strategic plan. I went there to do the strategic plan for a number of organizations. I don't know if anyone can read it or not. If you can, tell me what it says. But they have 7 goals in their strategic plan. And for all of you, the strategic plan is the roadmap. And I know your colleges, the departments have a roadmap. It's pretty common for an association to have a roadmap too. So when you get on the board, one of the first things you ask is, where's the roadmap? My job is to advance the strategic plan. So this is just an example. And it was also another example of, do your stakeholders know what's in your strategic plan? What's the leadership working on? So it's a great way to communicate value to members. Here's what we'll talk about. I want you to be comfortable in competence and governance. The different distinction of a 501c3c6, your designation as the IRS, your fiduciary roles, the 3 legal principles, the governing documents that you should have received and read, the insurance that you have, risk awareness, your strategic plan. Laxmi, I would encourage them to ask a question at any point. Maybe they'll type it into the chat, and we can either save those, or if you feel like that there's a breaking point and just someone's got a hot question, let's tackle it. I want everyone to be able to use the information I give to you with this organization, but many of you serve on other nonprofit organizations. So I want you to be able to use this for other nonprofits too. Here's the board of directors and what we sent to you. This is Donna, this was sent out?
Yes, and it's in the meeting folder, but I also sent it directly.
Okay, so this is 20 pages that I did, 20 pages on serving on a board of directors. You are welcome to download it. You can adapt it if you need to create a leadership manual, or if you serve on any other board, you're certainly welcome to use that. But it is, everything that I'm going to cover is in here, and you'll see some of the slides that I share have a page number in the top left, just in case you follow that guide, you want to write on it. And if you want a fresh copy, we'll give you a fresh copy so you can have that after the seminar. The authority for the organization. I don't know if all of you know, but you're following Florida laws. So you get your authority to make decisions on behalf of the corporation from the state of Florida. So you're a not-for-profit corporation registered in Florida. The state of Florida gives you volunteer immunity. So if you all are working as diligent board members at the governing meeting at the board table, you have volunteer immunity from the state of Florida. So you can't be sued for your decisions as long as they're within the governing documents that you've read. So just checking, and just a reminder to you that we're following the state laws of Florida as a not-for-profit corporation. And then the IRS, we registered with them because we didn't want to pay federal income tax. So it's very, very special in the USA, and there's no other country that I know about it, that the corporation is allowed not to pay federal income tax. So all of you are familiar with the budget, and I believe it's $693,000 annual budget. And we don't have to send any tax to the federal government. But because of that, there's more scrutiny on the board of directors. They expect transparency. They want to make sure that you're protecting the resources and you're using the resources for, as you see here, the mission of the organization. So all of you are familiar with the mission. The primary objective is the improvement of college level education, city urban plans. You'll see also that you're a 501c3 organization. So you're not a trade association as much as you are a society that represents the colleges. The trade association would be allowed to do lobbying, political positions. A foundation is a little more pure and is not expected to be doing any lobbying. So I wanted you to know that. And you were founded after I was born, but not too long after that, in 1959. So you were getting ready for your own celebration too. Here's the second page of the first page of the tax return. It shows me your budget. So all of you should be familiar with the budget. You can see that before the pandemic, and all of you should think about this, is that we had an income of 885,000 during the pandemic. There's a slight blip in that, went down to 764, and you know what your budget is this year. You've approved it, it belongs to you. It also shows your assets at the bottom of the screen. So you are combining the assets and the budget to know the strength, the financial strength of your organization. Laxmi, it really is a healthy organization. Everyone on the board can be very, very pleased with that. Now, the questions here are new questions from the IRS. So here's a couple of examples. Do the committees keep minutes? Now, that's not hard to do. It's not a staff job. Any chair or co-chair or vice chair could take a set of minutes on one piece of paper to say we met and here's the recommendations we have for the board of directors. When I circle at the top here, it asks if there are any diversions in the organization. The IRS is asking the board of directors, did you lose any money through theft? So if they're going to say you don't have to pay federal income tax, they also want to know that you're protecting the assets. One of the things that the IRS asks is, do you have a conflict of interest statement? So anyone with a conflict of interest is really expected to disclose it at the start of the year. And you have a nice conflict of interest statement form. I've read it, it serves perfectly. And it's just about disclosure. Maybe you've got a spouse who works in something that competes with the association. Maybe you've got an investment and we're talking about something that relates to the investment at the board meeting. It's perfectly fine to simply say, Madam President, there's something on today's agenda and I wondered if it could be perceived as a conflict of interest. And then they'll decide how to handle that. We may just say, thank you very much for letting us know that, and that's fine. Or we may ask you to excuse yourself from the vote, to recuse yourself. So the IRS now asks, oh, Madam President.
Bob, so it's the responsibility of the individual board member to alert the president and the executive director if they feel there's a conflict of interest, right?
Yes, ma'am. It's not your job to chase the board member. We're all equals. I think there's 17 on the board. We are equals at the table, and no one would want to feel that someone's having personal gain from one of our discussions. So it's very easy to say, you know, there's something that maybe it's going to be valuable. I have a position with another association, or I have a designation from another organization. It's good to know those things. It's just sharing. The knowledge is actually valuable, and through that we can actually find out who's got connections with other organizations. So I like that the IRS asked you to do that. So I just shared the budget with you and the tax return, and this is what you filed in Form 990. I should also mention, let me go back 2 slides. If you look at the top right of this slide, it says that Form 990, the information return, is a public record. So if anybody at all were to say, oh, you're on the board of directors of the ACSP, I'd like to have a copy of the tax return. If you fail to give that person a copy of it within 30 days, there's a $5,000 to $10,000 fine for the organization. So you just simply, someone could say, you know, I've been asked for the tax return. Donna, could you make sure that they get it? Now, I also know that it's online. I could find it with just in a minute in a couple of locations. So board members, I want you to be familiar with this. You have heard that we're registered as a not-for-profit corporation in Florida, and we registered and sent your name to the IRS in Washington, D.C. Where's the money come in from? I always look at that. I look at the strength of the organization. So the $693,000 that you passed in your budget this year, and it's time for a new budget coming up, 2022. But I divide it and I look at where the income's coming in from. Dues is a smaller portion, probably less than 20%. Conferences are critical to this organization. So those of you who are on a committee for a conference, you can see this is the gross income, but this is expected, what we expect to bring in this year. So you know what the terminology, you should be familiar with the designations or the terms, the streams of income in the budget. But we've got grants, awards, JPER, that I think is the journal, the annual conference, and then a small part of dues. So maybe as a board member, I look at, is there another piece of the pie could we create? You could see this. Is there something else that we could deliver to the members? What is it? Was it an online course? Is it something we could create and educate architects? But I'd like you to have additional income if you think about that through your committees or through the board meetings. So with finances, just make sure that you're familiar with the budget. It belongs to the board, not to Donna. I like to know that what your assets and your income is, and I saw that, I just showed it to you on the information return. You will get financial reports. When you get a financial report, the proper motion is I make a motion to accept the report. You do not make a statement of I approve the report. You've not seen the report until now at this meeting. So I'd like to make a motion and let the minutes reflect that we received it. We had a chance to ask questions. Well, we're not approving it. We approve the budget, we approve an audit, but we don't approve the financial statement. You may or may not do an audit. The IRS likes to know how you handle that. An outside person looking at the books so that we're protecting everyone on the board and the staff. Savings, you can have as much in savings as you want. A lot of board members will say we're nonprofit, we can't have savings. I like to encourage you, Donna, you've got it. Our budget is a certain amount. I like to think that we have 100%, an amount equal to 100% of our budget in savings. So if there was a disaster, one of our conferences collapsed, something happened, we could still survive for 6 to 12 months. And you will see IRS Form 990, and just be ready for it. I want you to be familiar with what it is. And if someone asks you for it, just ask Donna, hey, could I have a copy of that? I've been asked for it. Anyone at all, doesn't have to be a member, anybody at all can ask for a copy. Madam President?
Bob, you mentioned savings and our bylaws speak about a reserve.
Yes.
Is that the same thing?
Yes, ma'am. Reserve and savings are the same. The reserve is what we set aside in case there was a disaster, an issue. But it's also the money that is the board of directors. I don't want them to spend it down, but I want them to feel like if we need to invest in technology for the association, or we need to buy D&O insurance on the board, the money is there.
So we just recommended, the executive committee just recommended to make the reserve 350,000, which is less than what you're saying, but it's more than what we had. And so I just put that out there. I'm not asking for but I just want to put that out there.
I'm okay. I think that the minimum savings or reserve for an organization should be half a year's budget. So that also gives you some leeway that if we felt like we needed to use some of the reserves, you're in a position you could do that. And I commend all the leadership before us, some of them on the call, that have worked hard to build those savings. Donna, I know you had a lot to do with that. So the governing documents, I said to you that the state of Florida gives you volunteer immunity. So this is important for you that you've got volunteer immunity, but you have to work within the governing documents. So the association's got a handbook and you have access to the bylaws and other information, but here's the governing documents for your organization. Now there is an expectation that you read that. If you sit in front of American Idol tonight with a yellow highlighter, you'd be able to read all of this, just go through it, make some notes. So the mission statement was approved by the IRS. The Articles of Incorporation was approved by the state of Florida. The third one, the bylaws, is your relationship to the members. So you have to follow your bylaws because the members enforce the bylaws. So for example, if it says that the treasurer will be covered by surety bond, or that the board will have an audit, and you don't do that, then members have the ability to enforce the bylaws. So please read the bylaws. The policies are the wisdom of the board of directors before you. We have policies on conflicts of interest, confidentiality, maybe antitrust. Policies are the wisdom of the board of directors. The strategic plan is a roadmap. I showed you one from the Ukraine. I'll show you some others today too. And then the financial report is a picture of what assets you have, what reserves you have, and how we expect to bring in and spend money this year. So please be familiar with that. This is not hard for a board member to look at this and say, okay, if I read this, I'll be a better board member. And then the state of Florida gives you volunteer immunity. here's your mission statement. Now, your mission statement is a little bit longer than some that I see. The ACSP promotes education, research, service, and outreach in the US and throughout the world by seeking diverse needs, accreditation. So please be familiar with the mission statement. Remember, I said that it's at the top of the list, that we're here to advance the mission statement. So there it is, please be familiar with it. You also have values. So not too long ago, the association adopted values. These are not values for the member schools. These are values for the board of directors. So how do you frame a decision at the board table? So someone says, I've got a good idea. You would look, how's it affect the mission statement? Does it fit within our mission? And is it framed by our values? And I see inclusive, inclusion, diversity, sustainability, scholarship, excellence. Those should frame the discussions you have at the board table. So this is on your website. Please be familiar with it. And here's how I use the mission statement. When someone has an idea, and Madam President, there'll be a lot of good ideas at the board table, and there'll be committees that present recommendations. I think it's fair to ask these questions. How does your idea advance our mission statement? Does it fit within our values? What's the economic impact? Everything that's recommended at the board meeting has an economic impact. It could be staff, it could be time, it could be money. And then does it fit into our strategic plan? So be familiar with the mission. Donna, I don't know if I said it, I think the mission statement's always on the agenda. So that when someone says they have an idea, you just look at that. All of you are fiduciaries. It's a legal principle that means that you represent the interests of not your college, but the 116 members. So you're there to represent the interests of all the members. They can't be at the board table. So when you're meeting, you are ensuring that you're thinking about, well, what about the College of the East, the West, our international friends, the North, the South, the urban, the rural? Are we representing their interests when we make a decision? And the legal principles of being a fiduciary, and all of you are fiduciaries. So let me remind you, you're a trustee of the corporation, the association, and you're a fiduciary on behalf of the 116 members. And what's required is you practice duty of care. So when you're at the board table, you're tuned in and you're asking the right questions. If we do that, do we have insurance? Will that affect our tax status? Are we allowed to lobby? So you're asking the right questions at the board table. Duty of care. Duty of loyalty. You're loyal to the organization, not to your college. You are represented as a board to advance the interests of the Association of Collegiate Schools and of Planning. And duty of obedience is obedient to those 6 governing documents that I shared with you. So I'd like you to have, maybe it's going to be online, a virtual leadership manual. And Donna, they could click on that and open up those 6 documents. Or I could give them a nice leadership manual.
And they're all online.
Oh, perfect, perfect. So no one could say, gee, I didn't know that. That's important that you have access to it. And I actually like the minutes to reflect that everyone this year had access to the governing documents so that the volunteer immunity will kick in. When you get on a board of directors, is there any risk? You know, I've seen organizations sued because they use copyrighted materials. I've seen organizations that talked about price fixing. I've seen organizations that harassed a member or discriminated against a member. So we buy D&O insurance on you. And I looked in your budget. I think that the D&O insurance cost about $1,500. And what that is it means that if the board was to be in any trouble, that we could hire a law firm to protect the board of directors and the association. So you can all rest assured we have bought D&O insurance on you. So to Laxmi and all the board members, they will be asked to serve on other boards. One of the first things they should always ask is, do you offer D&O insurance on the board of directors? So you can all take a sigh of relief and go, oh, good. And then you're incorporated. And I checked on that and I saw that in the state of Florida. So there's a corporate veil. You have volunteer immunity from the state of Florida. And indemnification is what some boards have. To the best of my knowledge, you do not have indemnification. Indemnification means that if you had to hire your own attorney, that the board would consider reimbursing you. That's not the case here. So I don't want you to believe that you could hire your own attorney. You will not be reimbursed by the board of directors. Donna, you searched on that, and I think that we agree there's no indemnification, no reimbursement for legal issues.
We do not have that right.
Okay, I see a question in the chat, but I can't see the question.
I just forwarded it to you.
I can read the question if you would like.
Please.
And the question is really that we need, according to the presentation, we need to take minutes on committee meetings.
Yes.
And then right now we don't. And so do committee reports presented to the board suffice?
Yes.
Or do we need to do standalone committee minutes?
So what a great question. And that was a great example of duty of care. Is I heard and I realized, oh, we should be taking committee minutes. So I have a nice guide that's free on committee management. Inside is a report form for committees. Laxmi, yes, absolutely. The report that they give to you would be considered the set of minutes. But what we need to do, because the committees get their authority from the board, we need to make sure we know what the committees are doing. So it was a great question.
Are they obligated to make those committee meetings public as well?
No.
No?
No, and I like confidentiality. I'd like to think when we have a committee meeting, what we talked about will be treated with confidence. So if we're talking about a membership category, we were talking about which hotel to use at the conference. I'd like to keep that confidential until it's presented to the board. And then the board does not have public records. The only public record for the board is the tax return. The minutes are not a public record. The minutes are not a newsletter for the colleges.
So that's good to know, because we have, I think some of our minutes are all public, right, Donna?
Not anymore.
Okay. All right. So
Yeah,
we made that shift. All right. I think there's another question from Raymond on elaboration on what is volunteer immunity. And could you take that?
Yes, Raymond, it's the best example is every time someone has stopped on the side of the road, maybe a doctor to help a vehicle, and for some reason there's another accident. And all that person was doing charitable work to help that person on the side of the road. The same concept applies, is that you're working as a volunteer to advance the mission of ACSP. And so the state gives you volunteer immunity if you're working within the governing documents. Now, if you decide to hold a big party and you give alcohol to everybody, the volunteer immunity will not cover that. But as long as you're doing your job as a board member and working within the mission and the bylaws of the organization, the state will give you volunteer immunity because you're doing charitable work.
But in our business, because we are professors, most of us are professors or somehow connected with our own universities, and we've come together to support this association. when we say our usual business, the analogy of the physician treating the patient, for us, it would be like giving a class or doing a seminar on what is urban planning or something like that to an audience. And so we're allowed to do that?
No,
I think.
those are paid positions. So it only applies when you are a volunteer.
No, I mean, like if I go to my local sort of association, neighborhood association, and I say, I'm a member of ACSP and I want to tell you all about planning and how great it is, and also advocate for accreditation or whatever, right?
Yeah. You know what? It might apply because it's in the bylaws. It would be in the strategic plan, but I really think your D&O insurance would cover that, and it would probably be under errors and omissions. So Raymond, I hope that helped just a little bit. The other thing that protects the board is oops, I lost control of the screen. Sorry, just a second. Hi, everyone. You're still there? Hi, Bernice. The other thing that protects the board of directors is to do an orientation. So have we ever told the board these things? So the fact that you do an hour-long orientation every year or something like this gives more protection to the board to be able to say, oh yes, I knew that. Here's the conflict of interest statement that the association has. So it's not, once you've been given this, it's a pretty easy thing. It's short. To just disclose, yes, there's something that I'd like Laxmi to know, the officers to know. Please fill it out and return it to Donna, and we're going to keep that for a number of years on file. Remember, one of the questions that the IRS asks you, do you have a conflict of interest? And then they ask you, how do you monitor conflicts of interest? It's not really Donna or Laxmi that's asking the question. It's the Internal Revenue Service. So please fill it out and turn it in. On the right side is what I like to ask the board to sign. So you might be able to expand this form, Donna. Did you read the governing documents? So they were online. Did you get them? Did you read them? Are you here to advance the mission and serve the members, not yourself? Will you respect confidentiality at the board meeting and in the committee meetings? Number 4, will you disclose conflicts of interest? Number 5, you'll avoid antitrust violations. Now, I'll give you an example. I work with the Architects Association often, and I will remind them that no two people in the same business can get together and let's say they're bidding on the same projects, and they can't get together and say, oh, we should all bid the same thing. That would be price fixing. That's a very hefty fine for an organization. I don't see it happening in your realm, but I wanted to give you the example of what it is. And finally, you'll support the decisions of the board of directors. So Donna, I think that if you wanted to, you could expand the document you have on the left and expand it just a little bit. So we're protecting the board of directors by having them sign this.
Great, I can do that.
So on supporting the decisions of the board, here's a cartoon I paid for the rights to use. And what it says, I didn't say anything during the meeting, but I don't agree with the rest of the board on this issue. Now, just a reminder that when Laxmi starts the meeting, you have authority to speak up. You've been given that authority as a trustee of the corporation and as fiduciary. You're expected to speak up during the meeting. You're not expected to speak up after the meeting. After the meeting, you're expected to support the decisions of the board of directors. So when you're at the meeting, please speak up. Please prepare for the meetings, read the reports in advance, ask questions of Donna or Laxmi before the meeting if that helps you. But if you're not prepared, tell me what you need to prepare. What I'd like you to do at the meeting is be ready to discuss the issues and make decisions. The only reason you abstain from voting is if you have a conflict of interest. You don't abstain because it feels comfortable to you. You're at a meeting. The state believes that you are a trustee. The meeting was called. They expect you to discuss and to vote. So the only time you don't vote is if you have a conflict of interest. I think there's some questions.
Yes, there are two excellent questions. They're both linked, actually. How do we balance what we are legally required to do with regard to something like sharing of meeting minutes versus what might be a stronger practice of transparency that might be beneficial to our constituencies? So linked, we have several regional representatives on this board.
Yes.
They represent specific regions. We also will soon have categorical representatives.
Yes.
So there's a desire to go back and share and report back, hey, I'm representing you in this board. We talked about this, and how do you communicate that back without sort of violating any sort of best practice?
Laxmi, what a great board. I love those questions. So you do represent a region or designated seat. I'd like to keep the information in the board confidential until Laxmi and the officers say, okay, here's the messaging we'd like to have. A lot of times people will leave the meeting and feel like, oh, I can go talk about what we discussed. And you're not in that position. Legally, the chief elected officer, the president, is the spokesperson for the organization. Now, Donna, you could do what I would call maybe a board wrap-up, a board summary. The next day, we could get that out to the regional reps and say, here's what we decided. Here's the messaging we'd like to have to go to your regions. But no one should be leaving the board meeting and just kind of saying, oh, here's what I think we talked about. It's nice to keep that as a consistent message instead of people having different messages leaving the board meeting. So I'd like to have an executive summary. Now, the other part of that question was transparency. I love transparency, but not everything is transparent. I'd like the members to know what's in the strategic plan. I'd like the members to know the high level outcomes of the board meeting. But when we talk about Donna's salary as the CEO, that's in the minutes. That's not something that I want to pass out to other colleges. So I want to be careful. Transparency is good, but the minutes are a document to protect the board. They're not a newsletter.
I like the idea, Bob, of an executive summary after the board meeting ends, because it's also a way of keeping everybody reminded, because it's a long day, right? So
yes.
That's good. I also had a request from a board member, which I think is helpful, is to actually do the other end of it, to do a memo before the meeting. The board member was suggesting, could you do a memo before the meeting to frame what we're going to be covering, what we're going to talk about, and why it's important, and why I should be there, kind of thing. And we tried to do that this time a little bit. We prepped everybody for your visit and tried to frame it. So do you think that the book ending is a good thing?
I like the book ending, but I believe that the strategic plan is the book end. And I'm gonna, before we take a break, I want to show you a slide that I did for you, Laxmi, if I can find it. So here's your mission statement. I've already shown you this slide. And so if you look at this, I identified, if I can get this to work, I identified your mission in 4 areas that I believe the board's working. So what I did was I turned it into a strategic plan. At the top of that is your mission statement. And then these are the 4 elements that are inside your mission statement. So that's the bookend. So what we're talking about on today's agenda should all fit within the mission statement and the strategic plan. And then what comes out of the board meeting would be the executive summary of, we went in knowing that we have a mission and we have a strategic plan. We came out and we'd like to tell the 116 members, here's what we're doing to advance the mission of collegiate planning departments. So I cheated. I created a framework of a strategic plan for you.
That's helpful. I have another question in the chat. When we write minutes, we tend to make them almost like meeting notes, which are like they convey the flavor of the discussion. And we were just wondering whether that's good or probably recommended not. I mean, I think someone needs to keep notes, maybe Donna, but
yeah.
Could you, yeah.
Let's look at it from this perspective, that if anyone was upset with the association, the first thing they're going to sue or subpoena is, I'd like to have a set of the minutes. And the minutes, in whoever takes them, brief is better. Brief is better. So it's not a place for notes. It's not a place to say, well, we were going to use the Sheraton, but someone didn't like the parking lot and the pool, so we've decided to use the Marriott. And now all of a sudden, I've got some discrimination and some statements that might be inaccurate about the Sheraton. So really all I need to know is that the board made a motion for this hotel. They did their due diligence in discussing it, and the motion passed to hold it at the Marriott. So I don't need to have the notes. The notes can go back into the committee file folder. They can rest with Donna, but they're not part of the minutes. So if anyone were to be tape recording, including when you use Zoom, if you tape record the meeting, as soon as there's a motion at the next meeting, I make a motion to approve the minutes, then Donna has a responsibility to destroy the old audio tape. So we don't have a discussion about he said, she said. And then Laxmi, what you said was, it's a place to keep notes, and that's what I would call sidebar conversations. It's not at all. And then I believe whoever's taking the minutes wants to show that the board did their due diligence. So at the start of the meeting, Laxmi may have said, does anyone have a conflict with anything on today's agenda? And so the minutes start out by saying, after the president asked if there was conflict of interest, seeing no conflicts, the meeting proceeded. So I'm using the minutes to protect the board of directors and to show that they did their due diligence. We had a quorum. I like to think that the minutes will be distributed shortly after the meeting. They're never distributed as a Word document. They're always distributed as a PDF, so it's locked. There's no attachments to the minutes. We never say attached as a committee report, attached as Donna's report, because the minutes should stand on their own. The attachments can go to other files. And we've already talked about that the committees also keep minutes. So, Madam President, Laxmi, let's see if there's another question. If not, we're going to take a break. I'm going to come back and talk about meeting processes, better board meetings when we come back.
So let's give folks a chance to, because it's quite a lot of information that was just conveyed to us. It is all, I would say, a very good review, and some nuggets of information that I didn't know, I really didn't know. So let me ask you this question, Bob. We have Canadian members. And so is there any issue with our Canadian members and how they engage with our US state laws?
I'm glad we do have members to the north. They're still covered because they're a trustee of the corporation. They still have the benefits of volunteer immunity, D&O insurance. Now, Canada also, if we have a Canadian chapter, also has a volunteer act or charitable act in Canada, and the provinces too. So if there is a Canadian chapter, they're also registered as just as we are registered with the state of Florida, they're registered with their province or with the state of Canada. The same concept applies. We have antitrust laws. They have competition laws, but they're benefiting. They're on a U.S.-based corporate board, so they benefit in the same ways.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's very helpful. I think, folks, you should use your break to think of questions that pertain directly to the activities that we do. So this is a great time, right? Like we want to make a statement about Ukraine. And then how do we handle that? We want to make a statement about conference location. How do we handle that? How do we talk about that? So these are all sort of practical examples of things that have come up or will come up. And we may use this time in the coming hour to actually like tackle that a little bit, right? Not to resolve, but like to figure out a process that fits with our responsibilities. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, so there's no questions about how do I make a motion? Does it fit inside the mission statement? Is there a second for the motion? What does it mean when I call the question or when the question is called? And have you read anything about rules of order? So when we come back, I'm going to share more resources for you.
We are back in session. Welcome. So we are going to hand it back to Bob.
Hi, Dad.
Okay, we're going to hand it back to Bob for a bit. And then I think this is our chance. We have 45 minutes set aside total, so we should probably make good use of it in the Q&A as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me share some slides if I can. I'm going to try again. Laxmi, thank you for the opportunity. And again, it's an honor. I know the organization is got a heritage and a culture, and everyone wants to do the best job that they can. Sometimes we get on a board and we're not quite sure what we've been asked to do, and we all have different interests. So I'm going to look at the meeting practices, and I'd like to talk about agendas, motions, conflicts of interest, the mission, maybe risk, but then let's get everyone to ask their questions too before we end this. This is just a reminder that I did this strategic plan based on your mission statement. I think most important, by looking at the screen, everyone should be saying, do I know what the mission is? And the mission is promotes education, research, service, and outreach in the US and globally. So just making sure that whatever we do at the board meeting is framed by the mission statement. So let's talk about board meeting processes. Here's where I always expect the board to be, at 50,000 foot. So there's an altimeter in governance. The board is responsible for governance. Donna and the professional staff is responsible for management. So board governs, staff manages, and it's a partnership. Donna is responsible for the administration of the corporation, serving the board, implementing the meetings, meeting the budget. And the board is responsible for what's the future? What do we look like in 2024, 2025? I'd like to think that your strategic plan would actually be Vision 2025. Where are we taking? What about our 116 members? Will there be more or less? What are the disruptors? So the board's thinking very high up there as to how do we best serve the members and through the organization. Committees all work for the board of directors. I recall you have, I believe, 13 committees and special interest groups. They get their authority from the board. Laxmi?
I had a naive question. So we talked a lot about voting and the privileges of being a governing board member and the responsibilities in the last session. We have committee chairs here and interest group representatives, and they are, by our bylaws, they are non-voting members. And no, Donna's shaking her head. You're muted. See, so
I just wanted to clarify, they're not members of the board at all.
they're not
So-
members of the board, but they are our people and our members, and they're actively involved. Let me put it that
Yes.
way.
Yes.
And so how much or how little do all these roles and responsibilities apply to them?
What I speak of is good governance. It's a great question. So I'd like good governance for the 17 board members. And I just looked at your tax return again. There are 17 names that are liable, accountable, responsible for the association. So the other people who are influencers and volunteer leaders, we can't do it without them. But they're not a voting member. They don't have liability. I don't know that we cover them for D&O insurance. There are 17 people who are responsible for the board. So I want the committees and the designated people to be engaged, but when it comes down to the vote, they are probably silent, and you're asking the 17 board members, now it's time for a vote. Sometimes it's hard. I know that you'll have someone that's a committee and say, well, I want the floor. Well, they don't have the floor. These 17 board members have the floor. They have to follow your agenda, and you control the agenda. So that's another thing that sometimes I wonder how an issue gets on the agenda when it's the president's prerogative to design the agenda. How are we advancing our mission? What are our goals? So sometimes when there are things thrown on the agenda, it would be possible to say that I don't feel comfortable with that on the agenda. So you have the prerogative of controlling the agenda, what's on the agenda. We'll talk about that. On the committees, I'm glad they're there. That's all I can say. I'm delighted they're there, and they do a lot. There's 13 of them, and they should all be aligned with the strategic plan. I'm going to jump to that if you don't mind. Here's the committees, and below that, I've aligned what I would say is your strategic plan. So when any committee is presenting something to the board of directors, we'd like to recommend a speaker. We'd like to improve the journal. They would all relate to tell you how does it relate back to the strategic plan. And then I built your plan on the 4 elements of your mission statement. And then for everyone on the board, when a committee makes a recommendation, and this is a sample of the minutes form, and I think that you said that a committee report would suffice as minutes, that's okay. At the bottom of this, when a committee makes a recommendation to the board, it should be able to identify how does that advance our mission statement? How does it advance our goals in the strategic plan? So if the recommendation is, and they're spending money or they want to take a position, then you're looking at how does it advance our mission statement? How does it advance our goals? These are all smart practices. I know that what happens in an association over 70 years is we've got this committee that does this, and we forgot to do this, and we don't know where our manual is, those sort of things. And I just try to bring it back to be very manageable, and everything's aligned and related. I wonder if there's any comments from any of your committee chairs on the phone, on the call right now.
This is Caitlin Dykeman. Yes, I do have a quick question. I just want to clarify a little bit more. I'm concerned about the fact that the committee reports to the board suffice given the IRS comments. And I ask because, for instance, I co-chair the doctoral committee, and I can tell you we have a lot of discussion around pedagogy, future direction of the committee, who we're serving, et cetera, things that conceivably would be very relevant, I would think, to the governing board, right, and to protecting us when we start to put on that liability lens. But we don't include those because we don't take minutes, right? In our meetings, we certainly don't include that level of detail in our committee report biannually. And so I'm just wondering, how do we balance that obligation as, you know, a representative entity, as you're saying, with, you know, also not wanting to micromanage and deal with minutes from every single meeting, because this committee, for instance, meets probably, oh gosh, I want to say at least, you know, 9 to 10 times before we even hold our workshop. And that's an underestimation probably of the number of times that we meet. And so I'm just wondering, how do we strike that balance? Because from what you've laid out, seems to me that there is an obligation under the IRS standards for us to then be including more detail perhaps in these biannual reports, but then how do we know what to include? And I'm speaking, you know, with the perspective of the doctoral committee co-chair hat on right now, not the governing board hat.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. I don't know that there's a good answer. I sense that you feel that you and I might agree that there are certain things that need to be presented to the board of directors. We need to ask for their permission or have them invest something or give their blessing to something. And then there's other just natural discussions that you want in a committee. I want the innovation, I want the creativity, but it's not a recommendation to the board of directors. Now, Caitlin, I wouldn't want the committee to talk about anything that could be illegal or get the board in trouble. But when it comes to recommendations and requests to the board, needs to be in the minutes. If it's a free flow, innovative, creative discussion of the committee, I would think that's expected. And I don't think that that's a part of the minutes because it's not an action. It was just a discussion. Hey, Caitlin, I have a question on doctoral. Do you create original works in the committee?
Yes, we do. And our faculty who present do. And we are actually recording them and trying to create an archive. So yes, and okay. I think other committees do the same, but particularly the doctoral committee.
I like that. I like that the materials that you create, that they are copyrighted by the association, that we know that the association has got intellectual property. Now, of course, you said that other people own some of that, but if it's something that the doctoral committee has created, I would like to see the copyright logo, the date, the name of the association as this is our intellectual property. That adds value to the member who says, well, where did this come from? But there's another side of that, Caitlin, and I think I might have interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I'm just the way that it works, faculty offer, you know, for instance, one of the faculty members generated a template that the students are using now that's very useful, and she's used it with her own doctoral students. That's something that she does within her doctoral program at her university. So if you're talking about copywriting, she would actually have an obligation, I would argue, to copyright that with her university or herself rather than with the association.
I like that. And I think she's done a great service. And then if she were to say, well, I could give this to the committee, and the committee said, well, let's make some fine-tune adjustments so it's generic in form, then I would use the poor man's copyright by simply having a watermark or a copyright to say, this is something that our committee has created to help our 116 members.
Right, except that it's only available to the people who participate in the doctoral committee.
Okay.
and you know, to the students who are participating, and she's making it available because this is basically an extension of her teaching in her mind, right? And so it's available to the people who are part of that doctoral workshop, and they have to register, Donna, they have to pay money, right? And they're chosen. So you can see how this starts to get sticky. Yes,
I am a big fan of creating something, and I call it a golden handcuff benefit, that people say, where'd you get that? Oh, I got it from ACSP. So if there's ever that chance for doctoral or any other committee to create a form, a process, and they're able to add their watermark, their footer, their copyright to it, as belonging to the association. I'm a big fan of that. People pay a lot in associations for what I call business intelligence. What do you have that helps me? The other thing I wanted to say, Caitlin, is that and Donna especially, the original works of committees do not transfer to the association unless you have a policy that says all original works of committees belong to the association. Otherwise, Caitlin could say, no, my committee created that belongs to us. That's not the property of ACSP. So that, Caitlin, that kind of looked at both sides of that. The last thing I would say, Caitlin, is the QR code on the screen is an 18-page book for committee management. And then I showed you in it are some forms about if a committee is going to do something, how does it align with the organization? Caitlin, do you have a scope of practice for the committee?
No, we haven't outlined anything for the committee in that sense. I mean, we haven't put it in writing. We describe it verbally, but
Yeah.
again, and we have a standard practice. We have a group history and mission, but other than that, no.
Yeah, it sounds like some of it's in writing. Laxmi, I would ask every committee chair to say, give me your scope of practice so that we know we're working within what's been framed. Caitlin, thank you for the question.
Will do. I have a question from our secretary. Kristen, would you mind unmuting and asking the question, please?
Sure. So I'm just trying to balance how much to put into the minutes, because I hear what you're saying about being careful and thinking strategically about the organization. And considering, and I put some of the language there that I heard you mention, for instance, that all have access to the governing documents and establishing that at the beginning, or that the president has asked if there are any conflicts of interest, and hearing none, the meeting proceeded, and things like that. And certainly the motions and who moved and who seconded. But it sounds like that's pretty much it. So like the background to explain how we arrived at something really shouldn't be in here. It should basically just say the budget was presented, there were questions, yes, the budget was approved with these modifications, and that's it. The questions you don't even list, you just say it was discussed.
Yeah, that the board did their fiduciary duty. Yes.
Okay. So there's really no reason, I mean, no background that needs to be kept, or if there's anything that's, you have the different levels that the groups are at. So Donna's really in our management position, keeping track of all the specifics. Is that basically it, as I understand it, or how?
I think so. I think there's some issues that I would go a little bit deeper, or I would have a lighter version. Let's say that there was an issue with the financial and we needed to start talking about, well, where did the embezzlement happen, or why didn't we buy insurance on that? So some of those conversations I would put in there, and what I'd said in my slide on that is that I want statements in there that protect the board of directors. Right. So that the board carefully looked and then might have asked, why didn't we have insurance on the conference? So I don't want to go too deep, but I want to show that they did their due diligence. Hey, Kristen, did you say that you identify who made and seconded the motion?
Yes. Is that appropriate or no?
you don't have to. Culturally, you may want to, but what it does is it adds more liability to the person who made the motion. So a motion was made and seconded. At that point, it belongs to the board of directors. So we don't have to say, Caitlin made the motion, Laxmi seconded, because if there's ever an issue, those are going to be the first two people that are subpoenaed.
Ah, okay. I will keep that in mind. Thank you.
So I don't want to, Laxmi, I don't want to change the culture of your organization, but if it just you felt less litigation or less opportunity for risk, just consider it.
Thank you. Okay. We should let you move on to your finishing your presentation, I think.
So don't forget, this is a free book to any of the committees. And then what I'm suggesting from an outsider is that every committee has a scope of practice so that we know exactly what's framed, and then any member at the committee knows exactly what we're supposed to be doing. I think one of the best ways to lose a member is to invite them to a committee and waste their time. Hi, Arlie.
Sorry, I'm going to lower my hand and save my question for later. Let you move on.
Okay, so let's talk about meetings, because I think that's where we'd like to go. As I started at the start, the first session, you may not know all the questions to ask, or there's a lot of pieces to the association, and you're trying to figure out, well, what's D&O, what's a 990, what's indemnification, how do I make a motion, how often do we meet, what's expected of me? So let's use some examples here. The meetings, let me see if I can, meeting frequency, I think Donna is twice a year.
Yes.
That's at a minimum. I usually work with organizations to meet 4 times a year, sometimes 3 times a year. If you ever felt like me, it's really up to you as the chair, as the chief elected officer. Should we have another meeting? Would it help the industry advance, the profession advance the mission statement? Then that's something that you would discuss. Do you go into executive session without Donna ever?
Hardly.
Okay. And that's the right answer. And I say it for Kristen's benefit too, is that when a board feels like they can go into executive session and they have no staff in there, very often someone wrongly thinks, okay, now we can talk about anything. And that's when someone might say, well, is that when you discriminated against me? Is that when you voted against me? Is that when you set price fixing? So when you're in executive session, because there's no agenda and no minutes, and no Donna to protect you, that becomes dangerous. So I only like to go into executive session if there's a serious member grievance or the executive director's performance review. Otherwise, I prefer not to go into executive session. Everyone on the call knows you need to have a quorum to conduct business. A quorum is 51% of the board, but a reminder to you that the state of Florida says if it's a duly called meeting, they expect all the trustees to be at the meeting. So if you're on the board, we're expecting you to be there. On the agenda development, Laxmi, that's something that you do with Donna. You design it. Now, an awful lot of agendas, when I ask why does it look like that, the answer is, oh, we've always had it like this. So it's okay for you to put the mission on there. It's okay for you to limit the committee reports to 2 minutes each. It's okay to say, here's the things we're talking about, and I don't want to add new things to it. You can bring that at the next meeting or a different forum. So you design the agenda that you want. Oh, lost the, sorry, one more time. So do you use the consent agenda? Okay, so to everyone on the call, it might sound awkward. A consent agenda is the process of sending out the committee and staff reports in advance. So let's say that 2 weeks before the board meeting, Donna has sent out, here's the committee reports, here's the executive director's report. As fiduciaries, you have a responsibility to read the reports. You should not be coming to the meeting and go, oh, I'm so sorry, I never had time to read it. You're a fiduciary and a trustee. Fiduciary on behalf of the members, that you are willing and you are reading these reports. And then at the meeting, Laxmi, someone at the start of the meeting is going to say, we all got the same reports. I don't see a reason to go through reports, to listen to reports, to read reports that don't call for action by the board. So I make a motion that we accept those reports as presented. So if people do that, then we've just saved an hour at the board meeting, as opposed to, well, our committee did this and we need to talk for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, but there's no request for action of the board. We talked about meeting minutes. We've talked about room setup is not necessary because of the virtual meetings right now. And I've got to get back into a PowerPoint that works. I got it. Okay, a couple more slides, and then we're going to open up for conversation. Parliamentary procedure. You have two choices. Robert's Rules of Order will guide you through the board, through the meeting. You'll know how to make a motion. You'll know the priorities of motions. You'll know how to second. You'll know what call the question is. The other option of that is on the left side of the screen. It's $1.50. And Donna, yes, I've sent a copy to you and Raymond. It's cartoon format. But when Laxmi says, that's a good conversation, is there a motion? She doesn't want to hear crickets. She wants someone to say, yes, I'm ready to make a motion. So use Robert's Rules of Order, know that you follow the agenda, you respect the chair of the board. Before you speak, you ask to be recognized. Make sure that whatever you speak up fits into the agenda, and use Robert's Rules of Order so we can keep moving the meeting ahead without having these sidebar conversations. Sometimes I bring Elmo to the table. Elmo stands for enough, let's move on. So here's my Elmo. Always carry Elmo with me. Maybe some of the board members want to get their own Elmo. So when you're on the call and you're able to say, Madam President, I think we've talked about that enough. It really means the same thing as I call the question. We've talked about it enough. I think that we're ready to vote. But sometimes Elmo is just a little softer way. Elmo standing for ELMO, enough, let's move on. So what are some of the processes in a meeting? Conflicts of interest, we've already talked about it. If there's something on today's agenda, anyone at the board table could say, Madam President, there's something on the agenda. I really feel like it could be a perceived conflict of interest. Let me just bring it to your attention. Now, you don't have to ask them to leave. You don't have to kick them off the board. You simply have to say, thank you very much. I'll make a note in the minutes. And then maybe someone would say, that's pretty serious. We might ask you to recuse yourself from the vote. The same thing applies to the committees. So when the committees meet, the chairs might want to start that meeting with, does anyone have a conflict of interest with anything we're talking about today? And watch out for abstaining. The only time you abstain is if you have a conflict of interest. Confidentiality, we've talked about it. Just to repeat it, when you're at the meeting, be very, very careful about who's in the background, especially on a Zoom meeting. You've got a department, you've got people walking behind you. We're talking about things that relate to this corporation. Be careful with the background, be careful with texting during the meeting, and be careful with speaking after the meeting. Laxmi, or the president, is the elected officer. There's a concept called apparent authority. Laxmi, let me make it clear that board members who appear to be speaking for you, you're liable for what they say. So if a board member were to go out and say to a university college president, oh, the association is against this and we would never do that, and the college said, gosh, that seems offensive, Laxmi, you're responsible for that. So board members do not have authority to speak up for the organization when you should be the speaker. They cannot usurp your authority to speak on behalf of the organization. Now, we solve that by saying, let's do an executive board summary so that they remember what we've decided at the board table. Agenda development is between you and Donna. Here's what I like to do. I would take new business off the agenda. What I like to do is when you send out the meeting notice, I'd like to ask any board member, is there any new business you'd like on this agenda? So that there's no surprises at the end of the meeting. You're ready, people are starting to lose interest or they've got places to go. And at the end of the meeting, you say, is there any new business? So the best time for that is before the meeting. Now, gosh, if you're going to present new business, could you tell us what that is in advance? We'll get it into the right position. We'll consider it if it's the right timing for this particular meeting. Not every board member knows the history of the association. Maybe some of it is good new business, some of it is something we've already tried to do. And then rules of order. You have a parliamentarian, Raymond. So think about this. This is some sort of cheat sheet. And Donna, have you found a cheat sheet for that board?
I did. It's in the board folder.
Okay, perfect. And remember when someone says, I call the question, and everyone looks and says, what's that mean? It means we've talked about this issue enough. I think it's time to vote. Okay. So how does it get, someone would like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion, Madam President. I think that there's a framework for all motions. And if everyone on the board table thinks about the framework for themselves before they start saying, well, I think I should make a motion and here's how I feel about this. So here's my framework. Does it advance our mission statement? So everyone on the board knows what the mission statement is. I'm going to repeat it. The association promotes education, research, service, and outreach. So if something is outside of that, you're welcome to say, well, why are we talking about that? That's outside our mission statement. The second thing I would frame it with is, what about our 5 values that we've adopted? Have we adopted values that your mission is either inside or outside the values? So I showed you the 5 values. It's you know, let's know what they are as board members. That's part of your guiding document. Is it legal? Are we allowed to do that? So let's say a 501c3 can't take political positions. They cannot try to influence a political position. So is it legal if we do that? Or let's say someone wants to have a big private reception in your room at the hotel suite, and they say, Donna, hey, go buy all the liquor and you can pour it, and we don't have insurance for that. So before you make a motion, make sure it's legal. Does the motion benefit all the members? As a fiduciary, the 17 of you represent all the members, all 116. So when you make a motion, does it apply to everybody, or is it something that you or your college is interested in? Is it part of our strategic plan? So that's got to be developed. Does it affect our assets? So our assets are our intellectual property and our budget and our revenue and our reserves. So if I make a motion and say, I think we should cancel the conference. Well, is that damaging? Remember, 50% of the budget comes in from the conference. How does that affect the assets that we need to use to serve the members? And does it set a precedent? If we say, yeah, we're going to start taking positions on something, are we going to do that every time there's opportunity to take a position? Keeping in mind that a 501c3 does not take political positions or does not try to influence politics. So before I make a motion, I'd like to not make the rest of the board think about it, but make myself think about it. Okay, does this motion fit our mission, our values? What's the economic impact? What's the precedent? What's the long-term consequence? Would you like to have discussion on this, Laxmi?
Yes, please, because there's a very thoughtful sort of hypothetical scenario, which is not probably hypothetical, in the chat. And since the author is in the room, may I request Rolf Pandel to unmute and just read out his what he posted in the chat, please.
So I am unmuted. I'm using this as an opportunity to get a little exercise at the same time. So please excuse my unprofessional appearance. I'm going to scroll back. And I'll just read out the hypothetical. Assume the ACSP decides in 2023 to cite its next conference in City 1 in State B. And that's by that I meant the 2025 conference. In 2024, State B passes a new law restricting reproductive rights, and national boycott of tourism to State B ensues. Large numbers of ACSP faculty members or member programs notify the board Sorry, I have to scroll through here. My touch screen doesn't work so well. Notifies the board that they intend to honor the boycott, leading to estimates that conference attendance will drop by at least 40% unless the venue is changed. What criteria should the board use to decide whether to move the conference or stay with City 1 and State B?
Boy, that was a quick quick transition to getting off there. So thank you, Rolf. I appreciate it very much. So I tried to frame some of that. Are we going to take a precedent when we're charged with advancing, educating, and serving departments of planning at colleges? Are we going to start taking precedent on politics? If so, how many times will that affect the contract? Now, Donna has a 2 or 3 year contract with an organization, with a hotel, with a city. What's the economic impact for an association that relies on 50% of their budget from the conference? So if a member wants to honor a boycott, great. If the association's honoring a boycott, are you getting into 501c3 political positions? Are you setting a precedent? Are you injuring the income, long-term income, because we already have a contract with that facility?
So in this case, what I saw was a potential conflict among our different obligations. We have an obligation to keep promises to both members who've done the organizing and to hotels and so on.
Yeah.
But we also have an obligation to safeguard the fiduciary interests in terms of money of the organization. And if in this situation, there's another potential host who offers in a less controversial site to host the conference, and if the arrangements can be made, really the question or the hypothetical playthrough of this in my mind is, let's just assume that there's an alternate site and that the board doesn't need to reach the question of whether the board wants to endorse the boycott or not, but is instead only trying to make a well-founded fiduciary responsibility related decision, but saying we know that it's going to fail at this site. We have a better idea that it's not going to fail at this other site. And so without even raising the question of should we as a board endorse the boycott or not, is that sufficient grounds on which to make that judgment and say we have no position on the boycott, but we have to take into account the fact that this board has a responsibility to deliver the income we need from this annual event?
So as a business person, a trustee of the corporation, and I was thinking to myself, you spoke, even if there's a hurricane coming and we have to move, there's still the cost of, we set it up, the committee did their work, the staff has done their work. A contract is a contract. So there's a loss of revenue. There's a penalty that goes with that. I like to honor the interests of the members, but I also have to recognize that the mission statement was to educate, research, serve, and outreach. And it does not say anything about, I mean, if it's a hurricane, I want to safeguard the members. If it's a political issue, it might not be our position to take it. Now, I also know that your expenses at the conference, it's a pretty small, does it make an impact? When I saw that you have $300,000 income for your conference, that means the actual expense in the state is even less. And you might say, well, why are we talking about that? Our impact is so small, and our mission is to educate, serve, and research for our members. So I think it's okay to say I would withdraw the motion, or I'm not sure that that's a precedent that we want to set. So there's a lot of factors there.
Right, well, this is actually drawn on a real world example from
Yes.
20 years ago when we decided to move the conference from Charleston to Kansas City. And as it happened in that instance, the move to Kansas City ended up making a little money instead of losing money, and even after accounting for the contract negotiations. But the long-term damage to the association, from my perspective as a former board member, the long-term damage in reputation and hurt feelings was also fairly severe. So this is a situation where there was a conflict that did in fact rise to the question, should we honor the boycott or not? And in my perspective, in hindsight, and also at that point, I didn't feel like we needed to have come to the question of should we honor the boycott or not, when we had the opportunity to really judge, is this going to be financially responsible for us to continue the conference in a situation where at least a third and maybe more of our members are going to boycott, including entire programs, which doesn't well serve the educational mission of the ACSP. It reduces the interaction that we would expect at the conference. So there were a lot of other reasons, but it sort of, in a way, the boycott itself was a red herring that ended up being the main thing that people were fighting out about ever after. And I'm almost positive that we're going to get to some of those same kinds of disputes in the next 5 years as more states become politically conservative, and we don't want to leave anything out. So we don't want to leave people out just by virtue of the political stance of their states. So this is almost like I'm raising this as a potential issue that I hope the executive committee will really think through, like what are the criteria we want to use, and what's our decision framework for doing these things, in advance. And I really feel like, somebody said that policy is just the scar tissue of past bad decisions, but a conversation and maybe some policy about how we decide when and how and why to move future conference, since that's, people associate, when people think ACSP, they think the conference. That's like the number one thing they think about. So that's my piece.
Thank you.
And maybe this just leaves it on the agenda for future meetings or conversations with the executive committee. But, but I did want to introduce that as a hypothetical that's not entirely hypothetical.
I appreciate it very much. And it's an awkward position. I'm a fiduciary. I want to make the right decisions on behalf of the organization, represent the interests of the members. I don't want to set a precedent. And as you said, Rolf, as I look at what's happening to associations and chambers with today's unsettling political environment, I don't know if we can react to everything in every state now. I want to look at the cost of what's happening, and then I go back to the values. I didn't see political positions in the values. I didn't see that we make decisions. What I saw was excellence. I saw diversity. I saw inclusion. So I want to make sure the values are either updated or we're not into taking political positions, because it's not in our mission. It's not the recommendation for a 501c3. I don't want to lose my 501c3 because we took a position that you hoped would change a political position. How do we separate inclusion? And I don't know if inclusion and politics are one and the same. It's interesting to me that you have a diversity committee and an anti-racism committee. I wonder, okay, how's that work? So there's a lot of things.
We also have interest groups.
There's a lot of things to look at. Rolf, I think that you did your duty of care. You presented it really well. And I would go back to how do we frame it if it got on the agenda or it shouldn't be on the agenda, and here's why. I think if you get into that, you're going to be looking at every single state and saying, Donna, that's okay. We'd like to have that. The legislature just ended. We need to pull the meeting. And your $300,000 is a drop in the bucket. Does it really influence something when your job is not to influence? Kaylin, you asked the question, this mission statement is to educate, research, and serve and outreach our members. I wanted, more than anything else, Rolf, I want to deliver value to the members. How do we deliver value as opposed to what's the boycott, what's the political issue? How do I deliver value? And I talked about, could we have intellectual property? Can we create a new slice of the pie for financial income? More than anything, I want to deliver value that draws, attracts, and sustains members. Madam President, I'm wearing red, so you all can find me. I can't find you anymore, Madam President. Where are you?
I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
There's a couple more questions, or actually comments. I just want to be mindful of time. We were supposed to finish at 45, past the hour. We're getting to 2 minutes to that. Would you mind staying on for another few minutes?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, because I think that what our group is grappling with is that you interestingly put it about, inclusion and politics are different things,
Yeah.
and they're not. Because at least from our group, right? Like, because what we think shouldn't be political is being politicized.
Yes.
Right. So, yeah, I agree with you. Inclusion shouldn't be political, but somebodies are politicizing inclusion or reproductive rights or structural issues, like Kristen talks about in the chat about, various things. Right. And so I think I'm not asking you for the answers, and I don't think that's right, but I'm saying it here explicitly that these are things that we need to grapple with, but not when there's a decision to be made. And that's what I think Rolf was saying as well, like we should have a plan ahead of time and then follow the plan or a strategy that we all agree to follow, if that makes any sense. And it may not come out the way any one of us is thinking, but we should all at least agree on a process. Am I correct in approaching it that way? This is the question to you, Bob. Yeah, best recommendations here.
I think that you said it well, and I know a little bit about your heart and your personality, and you're a healer. And I sense that while you're talking about that, I'm looking at the mission statement that we sent to the IRS, the improvement of college level education, city, urban, regional programs. And so I don't know that there's is there room for having this discussion at the board table? I'm always going to go back to the mission, delivering value to members. Now, it's nice to take a position, but if every group does that, it's going to be a very difficult process for hotel contracts, city contracts, conventions. And I saw something that was stated in the chat.
And the question is really, what is the IRS definition of political?
I looked at that while you were away. They do not want you to be involved in political as in electing someone. So not in candidate selection, not in contributing, not in referencing candidates. But on the edge of that is if you're doing a boycott because you want to change the mind of candidates, then you cross the boundary and went into something that a 501c3 should not do. So if you say, why are we doing a boycott? It's only $180,000 that we spent in Florida. We're doing it for our members, but we want to deliver value to our members. Are we doing it because we want to change a law or change the mind of a candidate? That's not our role.
But I would say that this, the question from Mike Boswell about what does the IRS say is answerable, because there are trainings that one can do and offer about the differences between a 501c3 and a 501c4.
Yeah,
that I learned about when I was at the Urban Institute. We were thinking about, should we be a 501c4 instead of a 501c3? And so there was a pretty dedicated effort there to say, like, can you speak to the policies? Can you speak to the issues? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
You can do those things, but you cannot endorse candidates and you can't engage in partisan kinds of activities. Unfortunately, those things get conflated in this environment. But that's, I think, so maybe this is just a request again to the executive committee to consider making 501c3 versus 501c4 like a mini training or something else that we could address at a future meeting.
Yeah, And Rolf, your points are all, you're dead on or right on. But I also look at it as a boycott has a purpose, where education has a different purpose. So yes, we like to educate. We like to make that an issue at our conference. But the act of a boycott is to bring about change. So that's where we get into the C3 issues. You may never get caught. You may never have an issue. And then you also could lose your 501c3 status. So who knows when someone's going to audit you, or you post something in a committee minutes, or you post something online that says, oh, we're changing our venue because of this, we're boycotting. It's now 2:51, and you do have a big agenda today.
Yeah, so I think that we've had a good overview of all the issues that board members should consider. We have had a discussion about, having processes and principles in place, and I've learned them. I'm still a little bit unclear on how to manage folks' responsibilities who are aligned with ACSP, but not formally part of ACSP. So, but I think that might be a separate conversation as well.
Okay.
And so that's an issue that we have to work through. Let me ask Mohammed, Raymond, do you have any thoughts or comments? Anybody else have any thoughts or comments before we thank Bob and wrap up this piece?
I did have some questions, but unrelated to the most recent discussion about procedure. But I think we're out of time, so we should move on.
And Raymond, I have something going to you in the mail. Madam President, thank you so much for the opportunity. If you have a question or something you need a resource for, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. We appreciate your time, and thank you. This has been very useful for me, and I think for many of our members. You can see the reactions in the screen. So thank you for your time and support, and we will keep talking with you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.